I was halfway through a smile when my phone buzzed under the napkin on my lap. Unknown number. Don't eat. They drugged it. The chandelier hummed above me, scattering soft golden light over the table. Silverware chimed like tiny bells every time someone laughed. Vanessa kept refilling my glass as if generosity could fix history. Dad was raising his voice over the music, toasting Gordon Hale, the guest of honor, a man whose smile had the precision of a scalpel. Every face around the table turned toward me as if on cue. I could feel the weight of their eyes while pretending to glance at my fork. I lifted my plate just an inch. A small glass vial sat in the shadow. Inside it, white powder shimmered like frost. My stomach dropped. The air smelled of rosemary and butter, too warm and too thick. I looked up and every smile looked painted on. Someone wanted me to be quiet. Someone on my phone was trying to save my life. I pressed the edge of the plate back into place and let my breathing slow. 3 seconds and hold for 4 out for 4. The trick a therapist once taught me to keep the panic from showing. Dad clinked his fork against his glass and laughed about the merger that would take our family company global. He said family like it was still true. Vanessa leaned towards me with a grin that smelled of champagne. She told me I looked radiant, the picture of composure, and how proud she was that I came home for Christmas dinner after all this time. I nodded. My throat felt dry. I wanted water, but not from the crystal glass in front of me. I could see a thin ring on the surface of the wine where it had been stirred. A small thing, but out of place. The server who poured it had avoided my eyes. The house looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt right. The garland around the staircase, the white poinsettias on the mantel, the jazz version of Silent Night playing in the background. The kind of curated perfection Vanessa lived for. Every detail said warmth and togetherness, but underneath it was control. Dad began introducing me again as if I were a brand being relaunched. Olivia Hart, former model, now a creative consultant. The face that built our early campaigns. He smiled like he was proud, but I knew what it really meant. He needed me back on display. Gordon Hale extended his hand across the table. His palm was cool, dry, and deliberate. He looked me straight in the eyes, assessing me the way men like him assess investments. I thanked him for visiting on Christmas Eve. He said some contracts were worth traveling for. Vanessa laughed too loudly. I sat back and let their conversation drift around me. I traced the rim of my plate with a finger, pretending to admire the pattern. Beneath it, the image of that vial kept flashing behind my eyes. I could almost hear glass rattling against porcelain. My stomach turned with a slow roll. When I left this house 3 years ago, I promised I would never again let them use me for their image. That night, I'd walked out in the middle of a dinner like this one, leaving my dad's disappointment hanging in the air. I rented a small apartment in Brooklyn and started over. Modeling gigs turned into styling contracts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I told myself independence was enough. Yet here I was again, sitting under the same chandelier that once made me feel trapped in a photograph that never stopped posing. Dad raised his voice again, calling my name to join the toast. I lifted my glass, smiled faintly, but didn't drink. The smell of alcohol made my stomach twist tighter. Vanessa's eyes flicked to my lips just for a second, then to Gordon, then back to me. A silent cue. I set the glass down. I caught Maria's reflection in the mirror behind them. She moved quietly around the table, collecting plates from the previous course. Her eyes met mine for an instant. She gave the smallest shake of her head, barely visible. My pulse skipped. I leaned forward, asking Gordon about his company's sustainability goals. The question was enough to make him launch into a speech, pulling my dad's attention with him. While they talked, I reached for my napkin, folded it carefully, and placed it across my lap. My hand brushed against my phone. I checked the screen under the table. No new message. Whoever had warned me was silent now. Vanessa's laugh floated over the music again. I remembered her voice from when I was a teenager, telling me to stand straighter, to smile, to remember that being beautiful was our currency. She had taken my mother's place when I was 9. I used to think she loved me. Later, I understood she loved how I made the family look. The conversation turned to the company's expansion plans. Dad said he wanted to introduce me to the partners at Hale Dynamics. He mentioned something about legacy and keeping the Hart name at the top. His words felt rehearsed. My skin prickled with the sense of a script I hadn't read. The waiter brought the main course. Turkey glazed with orange and cloves, buttery mashed potatoes. A dish of truffle beans. Vanessa praised the presentation and told me to serve myself first. Everyone waited. I felt the heat of their expectation. I reached for the serving spoon, scooped a small portion, and placed it on my plate. I could feel the camera hidden in my brooch vibrate once, the signal that it was recording. I hadn't planned to use it tonight. It was a leftover habit from working events where security was a concern. I kept it for peace of mind. Now it felt like a lifeline. I shifted slightly, angling the brooch toward the table. My phone vibrated once more. No text appeared, but I knew the alert pattern. The earlier sender had enabled self-deleting messages. Whoever it was wanted no trace. Vanessa asked how work was in New York. I told her clients kept me busy. She smiled sweetly and said it must be lonely doing it all by myself. I replied that peace was better than noise. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Dad leaned in, lowering his voice. He said he hoped I'd consider coming back to help the company's rebrand. He said the board missed my presence, and that I'd always been the heart of their campaigns. His hand rested over mine for a second too long. I felt the faint tremor of desperation beneath his confidence. Gordon Hale complimented my professionalism. He said he admired women who understood business as much as beauty. I thanked him without looking away. He smelled of tobacco and cedar. My gut clenched. I caught Maria's movement again. She brushed past me, setting down a new bottle of wine. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured for each guest except me. When she reached my glass, she hesitated and turned away. My breath caught. Vanessa noticed. Her tone brightened artificially as she asked Maria to fill mine too. Maria apologized, saying she thought I'd declined earlier. Vanessa's mouth stiffened. She insisted. Maria obeyed, filling only half the glass, then disappeared into the kitchen. I stared at the swirl of wine catching the light. My phone vibrated again. This time, a single word appeared before vanishing. Wait. Dad lifted his glass again, ready for another toast. He said to family, to loyalty, to partnerships that last generations. I raised mine, touched it to the rim of his, and let the edge ring softly. I smiled, placed it down untouched. A memory surfaced uninvited. I was 21, posing beside my dad at a gala while he announced a new client. Vanessa whispered behind her smile, telling me to keep my shoulders back, chin up, eyes soft. That was the night Gordon Hale first met me. He'd told my dad I had a presence. I thought it was a compliment. Back at the table, I realized every conversation, every laugh, was leading to something. My dad kept glancing toward Gordon as if seeking approval. Vanessa's tone carried the kind of sweetness people use before they strike. The music changed to an instrumental carol. The air felt thinner. I reached for my water, pretending to drink, then set the glass back untouched. I needed to find a way to step away from the table without raising suspicion. I looked at the large gift box under the tree wrapped in silver. Earlier, Vanessa had said it was a donation package for a charity gala. I stood and mentioned I wanted to make sure the tag was labeled correctly before the courier arrived. Vanessa waved a hand, telling me it could wait. Dad insisted I stay for dessert. I smiled, said I'd be quick. In the kitchen corridor, the air cooled. I leaned against the counter, exhaled. My hands shook. I opened my phone, scrolled to the message thread, but it had already vanished. Not a single trace left. Maria appeared from the pantry, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes flicked to the dining room door, then to me. She spoke softly. Do not go back until they finish the toast. Her voice was calm, certain. I wanted to ask why, but she was already moving past me, carrying a tray of brandy glasses. I watched her go, my heartbeat steadying into a slow drum. The chandelier light spilled into the hallway, golden and strange. I knew I had to return before they noticed. As I stepped back toward the dining room, I heard my dad say my name again. His tone was cheerful, performative. He asked me to give a few words about what family meant to me, what coming home felt like. I froze just outside the doorway. The smell of spiced wine drifted out. Vanessa's laughter rose again. My phone vibrated one last time in my hand. They will push. I walked back in, every eye waiting, every smile rehearsed. I placed my fingers on the rim of the glass, pretending to lift it. The crystal trembled faintly under my touch. My reflection shimmered in the wine. The moment stretched silent and bright like the pause before a storm. The night before the dinner, I almost didn't come home. I sat in my car outside the old stone gate of the Hart estate, staring at the wreath hanging crooked on the iron bars. Snow was falling in slow motion under the yellow lights, and for a moment, it looked peaceful. But peace was never what waited beyond those gates. My phone had buzzed with Vanessa's last message that afternoon. Your dad wants to see you. There is news about the company. It's time to come home, Olivia. She had added a heart emoji, her digital version of affection. I had stared at the words until the screen went dark, hearing the echo of her voice from years ago when she used to tell me that family was everything as long as you played your part. I drove through the gate and felt the automatic lock slide behind me. The driveway curved up through the birch trees, the same road I'd taken as a teenager after long days of photo shoots. The house came into view, lights blazing, every window glowing with the kind of warmth that photographs well. The front door opened before I even parked. Vanessa appeared in a cream sweater, her hair perfect, her smile brighter than the snow. She called my name like it was a homecoming. I stepped out the cold, biting through my coat, and let her hug me. Her perfume, jasmine, and powder filled my throat until I had to pull back to breathe. Inside the house smelled like pine and lemon polish. Everything was arranged the way she liked it, symmetrical, spotless, silent. A fire burned in the hearth, not because anyone was cold, but because it made the place look alive. My dad wasn't in the room. Vanessa said he was finishing a call with the board. She guided me to the couch, her hand light on my arm, rehearsed tenderness. She told me how proud she was of me for building a career on my own. Then she mentioned how difficult things had been lately, how the company was struggling after a few bad quarters. I nodded, waiting for the real reason she had called me back. It didn't take long. She said my dad wanted to discuss the future, that he was thinking about passing more responsibility to me, maybe even the official shares. I could almost hear the click of bait hitting the water. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups and asked about New York, my apartment, the clients I styled for. Her tone was casual, but every question had an edge. I told her I liked my independence. She smiled, saying independence was important, but family was security. Then she said softly that I shouldn't let the past cloud what could be a beautiful reunion. When Dad walked in, he looked older. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his hair had turned more silver than I remembered. Still, he carried the same confident air of a man used to being obeyed. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek and looked at me as if measuring something. I stood to greet him. He held my hands, his voice warm, his eyes calculating. He said he was glad I'd come home, that the company needed new energy, that maybe it was time to bring me back into the fold. We sat by the fire. He spoke about legacy, about how families build empires when they stand together. He mentioned Hale Dynamics, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime partnership. I asked if that was Gordon Hale. He nodded. His tone softened when he said Gordon had admired my poise and professionalism since our first meeting years ago. I remembered that night. I had been 21, barely out of college, wearing a dress Vanessa had chosen, smiling for photographs while the men talked business. Gordon's eyes had lingered too long and Dad hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. Vanessa said Gordon would be joining us for dinner the next night. She said it like an invitation, but her eyes told me it wasn't optional. Dad added that sealing this deal could secure the company's future, that having me there would show unity and trust. I looked from one to the other and realized they had rehearsed this speech. I told them I would think about it. Vanessa touched my knee and said there was nothing to think about. It was family. Later in the guest room, I unpacked my small overnight bag. The room looked the same as when I was a teenager, untouched, museum-like. My old modeling photo still hung on the wall. The vanity mirror reflected the same face, but harder now, steadier. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo of Dad and me from my first campaign. His arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling for the camera. Back then, I thought we were a team. The house was quiet. I could hear faint music from the living room, Vanessa's laugh carrying through the hall. My phone buzzed with a message from an old coworker asking if I was really spending Christmas in Greenwich. I replied with a simple yes. I didn't mention the reason. I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I thought about the times I'd said no to them before. The day I refused to attend a gala where Vanessa wanted me to model the company's new jewelry line. The fight that followed my dad shouting that I was ungrateful, that everything I had came from his name. I'd left that night suitcase in hand, walking out into the cold with nothing but my car keys and a small savings account. I had built my life from that moment. And yet part of me still craved his approval, the illusion that someday he'd see me as more than a marketing tool. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps outside my room. I turned off the lamp and stayed still. The steps paused, then moved away. The air felt heavy, charged. I thought of Maria, the housekeeper who used to sneak me cookies when I hid from Vanessa's photo sessions. I wondered if she was still working here. When morning came, the house woke early. Vanessa supervised the decorations for the dinner table as if it were a television set. I found Maria in the kitchen arranging pastries. Her hair was streaked with more gray, but her eyes were the same, kind and cautious. She smiled when she saw me. She said it had been too long. I told her it was good to be home. She wiped her hands and whispered that some things never change, then looked toward the hallway. Vanessa entered bright and busy, complimenting Maria's baking. She told me to wear something elegant but understated for dinner. She had already laid out a cream dress in my room, still in its garment bag. I asked if she had gone through my closet. She said she was simply helping, that she wanted me to shine. By afternoon, guests began arriving for cocktails. I stayed upstairs until the last minute, watching snow drift across the lawn. I put on a cream dress, simple pearl earrings, and hair tied low. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked polished, contained, and perfect, exactly what they wanted. Dad knocked on my door before dinner. He looked proud, emotional even. He said he knew we had our differences, but tonight was about unity. He called me his good luck charm. I smiled politely. He handed me a small velvet box, said it was my mother's bracelet, that she would have wanted me to wear it. My throat tightened. It was the first time in years he'd spoken about her. I thanked him, clasped it around my wrist. The gold was cold against my skin. Downstairs, the table gleamed under candlelight. Vanessa moved through the room like a hostess on camera. Gordon Hale arrived shortly after shaking my dad's hand, then mine. His grip lingered again. I kept my expression neutral. Dinner began with champagne and practiced laughter. Through it all, I kept thinking about the conversation from the night before. About legacy family partnership. The words felt like code for ownership. I realized then that this dinner wasn't a reunion, it was a transaction. As the first course ended, Vanessa leaned over and whispered that the board would be thrilled to see me, rejoining the family business. She said after tonight, everything would fall into place. I smiled at her, pretending to believe it. But something inside me had already started to turn. When I excused myself to wash my hands before the main course, I caught sight of Maria at the kitchen door. Her expression was tense, her lips pressed tight. She gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if warning me of something. I returned to the table, my pulse a quiet drumbeat in my ears. Dad raised his glass again, thanking everyone for coming. Vanessa looked at me with pride that didn't feel like love. Gordon smiled, a thin line of satisfaction. I didn't know what was waiting under that plate. I only knew that everything they were saying about family and future had a cost, and this time I would not be the one to pay for it. The moment my phone buzzed again, I knew the message was gone before I could even read it. I kept my hand under the napkin, pretending to adjust my silverware. The screen went black, the vibration stopped, and silence returned like nothing had happened. Around me, laughter filled the room. The chandelier above the table threw tiny specks of light across the glasses. Dad was talking about profit margins. Vanessa nodded at every word like a conductor keeping his rhythm. Gordon Hale smiled with that heavy confidence of a man used to owning the room. My blood felt colder than the ice melting in the wine bucket beside me. I looked at them and understood that every smile here had a purpose. I had become one of the talking points at this table. I forced myself to sit still, to breathe through the tightness in my chest. My first instinct was to run, but running would make me look unstable, emotional, and predictable. That was what Vanessa always said when I refused to follow her plans. She would tilt her head and say, "Olivia, calm is power." I learned to fake calm long before I understood what fear really felt like. Dad leaned forward, asking if I remembered the old marketing campaign we did for the Hale partnership years ago. I nodded, keeping my tone light. He smiled, telling Gordon that I had a natural gift for influence. He said I made people believe in the brand, that I embodied trust. His voice softened at the word trust, letting it hang there like bait. Vanessa's hand brushed my shoulder. She told me how lucky she felt to have a daughter who could bring grace to the company again. I met her eyes for a moment, saw the reflection of the candlelight in them, and wondered if she had practiced that expression in the mirror. She always did before public events. I took a small sip of water, more for the motion than the need. The air felt too thick. My skin prickled with awareness the way it does before a storm. Maria passed behind my chair, steady and quiet. I smelled the faint scent of coffee on her apron. Her presence was the only real thing in the room. Then Dad's phone buzzed. He frowned, excused himself from the table, and stepped into the hallway. Vanessa smoothed the napkin in her lap, her smile still fixed in place. She turned to Gordon, saying something about finalizing documents tomorrow. Their words blurred into the clinking of glasses. I felt the weight of the hidden camera against my chest, its soft vibration like a heartbeat reminding me to stay composed. When Dad returned, his mood had shifted. He looked at me, then at Vanessa, his voice quieter now. He said there had been a small issue with the accounts, but nothing to worry about. Vanessa nodded quickly, her eyes sharp. I caught a glimpse of something underneath the surface, a tremor she was trying to hide. Gordon raised his glass again and said how business and family were inseparable when built on loyalty. His eyes lingered on me. Vanessa agreed, saying loyalty was the foundation of everything. I smiled faintly and told them loyalty should never be confused with silence. Vanessa's fork paused mid-air. Gordon laughed, the sound short and dry. Dad cleared his throat and changed the subject. The dessert plates were brought in, delicate tarts dusted with powdered sugar. The smell was sweet, but it made my stomach turn. I noticed that my plate was placed just a little closer to me than the others. Maria's hand trembled when she set it down. She didn't look at me. I wanted to ask her what she knew, but the words stuck in my throat. I pretended to admire the dessert, running my spoon gently over the crust. The white sugar on top reminded me of the powder in that vial. I swallowed hard, smiled at Vanessa, and said it looked delicious. She thanked the kitchen staff for their attention to detail. Her eyes flicked to me again, waiting. My mind kept circling back to the message. Who had sent it? Maria was the only one who had given me any reason to trust her, but she wasn't the type to use a phone during dinner. I thought of the board members, the employees who might have seen things they shouldn't, or maybe someone in the house who still remembered the girl I used to be. Dad began discussing next steps for the Hale deal, how the merger would stabilize everything. He spoke in that smooth tone he used when convincing investors that risk was opportunity. Gordon nodded, agreeing that partnership required sacrifice. The word sacrifice echoed in my head. Vanessa reached for her glass again and said sometimes families had to give up comfort to gain security. My heart thudded. I set my spoon down carefully, afraid my hand would shake. I pushed the plate slightly away, leaning back in my chair. Gordon glanced at it and smiled. He asked if the dessert wasn't to my taste. I said I was full. Vanessa touched my wrist and said I should at least take one bite, that Maria had made it special for me. I felt the faintest tremor under her fingers, though her voice stayed calm. I looked at the tart, then at her. I smiled and told her I would try it later. I said it softly, politely, in the same tone she used when hiding a command. She withdrew her hand, still smiling, but her eyes cooled. The air in the room thickened. Dad refilled everyone's glasses and made a toast to new beginnings. I clinked mine lightly but didn't drink. The chandelier flickered light, catching the rim of my glass like a blade. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. When the guests finally began to disperse toward the living room for brandy, I stood and offered to help Maria clear the table. Vanessa started to refuse, then paused, probably realizing it looked gracious to let me help. She waved her hand and told me to do as I wished. In the kitchen, the air was cooler. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Maria was rinsing glasses, her movements careful. I placed the plate with the untouched tart beside her. She didn't look at me until she heard it touch the counter. Then she glanced up, her voice barely a whisper. "Do not eat anything tonight." My pulse jumped. I asked her if she had sent the message. She shook her head. "Someone else knows," she said, eyes darting toward the doorway. "They are not doing this for money anymore." I wanted to ask what she meant, but footsteps sounded from the hall. Maria quickly turned back to the sink, pretending to wash. Vanessa entered, smiling brightly. She asked if everything was all right. I told her yes, just catching up with Maria. She complimented my helpful spirit, then suggested I join them in the living room for coffee. Her tone carried that polished sweetness that always made my stomach knot. When I followed her back, I noticed Gordon and Dad standing by the fireplace, their heads closed, speaking low. The kind of conversation where deals are finalized and people become commodities. I sat down on the edge of the couch, pretending to be relaxed. My phone stayed in my hand, screen dark but ready. Dad turned toward me, his face softer now. He said he wanted to apologize for the years of distance between us. He said he had made mistakes. He talked about wanting the family to be whole again, to rebuild trust. I listened, waiting for the catch. It came quickly. He said he had arranged a private dinner for me and Gordon tomorrow evening, just to discuss ideas, nothing formal. He said it would mean a lot to him if I agreed. I kept my expression neutral, the kind of face I learned to wear in front of cameras. I said I would think about it. Vanessa smiled as if she already knew my answer. She said she was sure I'd make the right choice, that women who knew their worth could turn opportunity into legacy. Gordon lifted his glass and said he was looking forward to it. My chest tightened. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. The smell of smoke filled the room. I excused myself soon after, saying I was tired. Vanessa hugged me goodnight, her perfume lingering on my sleeve. Dad kissed my forehead, saying he was proud. I smiled, then climbed the stairs slowly, feeling their eyes follow me until I turned the corner. In my room, I locked the door, pressed my back against it, and finally let the breath out of my lungs. The mirror across the room reflected my pale face, my still perfect dress, my shaking hands. I walked to the vanity, set my phone down, and replayed the sound of that last vibration in my mind. Whoever sent that warning had saved me once. I needed to know who they were before tomorrow night. Outside the window, snow kept falling thick and soundless. The house looked peaceful from the outside, but inside every light was a spotlight, every smile a script. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door, listening to the faint laughter drifting up from downstairs. I realized then that the performance wasn't over. It had only just begun. I woke to the sound of muffled voices coming from downstairs. For a second, I thought it was part of a dream, the kind where you can't tell who's speaking or what they're saying. Then I heard my dad's name, sharp and impatient, cutting through the air like glass. I sat up, heart pounding. The clock on the dresser glowed 3:40 in the morning. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and that low conversation seeping through the floorboards. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my robe, and pressed my ear to the cold wood of the door. A man's voice, Gordon's steady, confident, then Dad's lower, almost pleading. The words came in fragments. Money contract tonight, deliver. My stomach tightened. I opened the door and stepped barefoot into the hallway. The light spilling from the office downstairs was dim and golden. I moved slowly down the steps, each one creaking louder than I wanted. The carpet on the landing muffled my steps as I reached the bottom. The door to Dad's study was half open. I stopped in the shadow of the hallway and listened. Dad's voice carried first. He said something about the deal being delicate, about timing and discretion. Then Gordon spoke, his tone colder. He said, "She's beautiful, Richard, but beauty alone doesn't close a contract." There was a long pause. I could almost hear my dad's jaw clench before he answered. He said, "Olivia understands the importance of family loyalty." My breath caught. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Gordon laughed softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. He said it would be easier if she thought it was her idea. Vanessa's voice joined in, smooth and familiar. The same tone she used at charity galas. She said she could handle me, that I trusted her. She mentioned the drink, the one I hadn't touched. Then she laughed light and airy, and said next time she would make sure I didn't have the chance to refuse. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. The wood felt cool under my palm. I had known there was manipulation, but hearing it laid out so plainly tore through whatever denial I had left. They were selling me. Not literally, maybe, but the intent was just as vile. Gordon said the agreement would be signed in the morning, that he wanted me to accompany him to his property in the Hamptons for the holiday weekend. Vanessa said she'd already told me about an upcoming business meeting, that she would frame it as a favor for the company. My dad said nothing for a moment. Then he sighed and said if this was what it took to save Hart Sterling, partners, then so be it. Something inside me went still. It wasn't shock anymore or anger. It was a deep, cold clarity. I stepped back from the door, careful not to let it move. My pulse was steady now, my thoughts sharp. I turned and walked back up the stairs, one hand sliding along the rail. In my room, I closed the door, locked it, and sat in the vanity. The reflection staring back at me looked calm, but my hands trembled in my lap. I reached for my phone and turned on the recording feature. I had caught only pieces of the conversation through the door, but it was enough to prove intent. Still, I needed more. I opened the small jewelry box where I kept the brooch camera and checked the battery. It blinked green. I had bought it for self-protection after a photo shoot went wrong years ago. It was shaped like a simple gold pin, easy to wear. I laid it on the table, planning to clip it to my robe pocket when morning came. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. I couldn't sleep. I sat there and thought about all the times I'd believed family meant something unbreakable. About how I'd worked myself raw to make them proud. How I'd mistaken duty for love. The realization was quiet but complete. They were never going to see me as anything but currency. At 7, I heard movement downstairs again. Coffee cups clinking, the faint rustle of newspaper pages. I showered, dressed, and pinned the camera to my sweater before going down. Vanessa greeted me with her usual brightness, asking if I'd slept well. I told her I had. She poured me coffee, the steam curling up between us. Dad sat at the table with his laptop open, typing. He looked up and smiled in that polished, distant way of his. He said Gordon had an early meeting, but we would see him later. I nodded, stirring my coffee slowly, pretending to be half awake. Vanessa mentioned she had arranged a stylist to visit next week, and said it was time to update my portfolio if I wanted to be the face of the new campaign. The way she said it made it sound like an opportunity, not an obligation. I played along. I asked what the new campaign was about. She said it was for a line of partnerships promoting family-owned heritage brands. The irony almost made me laugh. When Dad left for the office, Vanessa lingered. She lowered her voice, saying she knew things had been tense between us, but that she truly wanted to rebuild. I asked if that was why she had asked me to dinner with Gordon. Her eyes flickered just slightly before she smiled again. She said he was an important friend, someone who believed in me. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. For the first time, I saw her without the gloss. Her beauty was still there, but the charm was hollow. She had built her whole life around appearances, and I had been one of them. When she left the room, I went to Dad's office. The door was unlocked. The air smelled of leather and cologne. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, the kind of order that only happens when chaos is hiding underneath. I found the folder marked Hail Dynamics. Inside were documents, contracts, and a page with my name typed under a section titled Event Liaison. The terms included travel representation and exclusive partnership for a minimum of 12 months. My throat went dry. There was a note in Dad's handwriting that said final draft pending her signature. I snapped photos with my phone page after page. Each click sounded too loud in the quiet room. When I finished, I tucked everything back exactly as I found it and left. Maria was polishing silver in the dining room when I passed through. I paused, waiting until she looked up. I asked if she knew what they were planning. She hesitated, glancing toward the doorway. She said only that she had seen too much over the years and that people like them never believed consequences would reach them. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. The chef had been told to prepare a special wine for me tonight, a mix that would help me relax. She didn't know more, but the look in her eyes said enough. I thanked her and went upstairs, my mind already turning. If they wanted me quiet, I needed to make them speak first. I needed proof, not just whispers. I spent the afternoon setting up my plan. I positioned the brooch camera on the bookshelf in my room, angled toward the door, and kept the microphone in my pocket. I practiced the tone I would use: calm, curious, compliant. The part of me that used to act in front of cameras returned easily, only now the audience was smaller and the stakes were real. When evening came, Vanessa knocked on my door. She said Gordon had called to postpone the dinner until tomorrow, that he wanted to discuss details privately then. I nodded, hiding my relief. She smiled and asked if I wanted to join them for a small toast instead. I agreed. Downstairs, the fire burned low. Dad poured 3 glasses of wine. He raised his and said to new beginnings again. Vanessa echoed him. I touched my glass to theirs but didn't drink. I watched their faces, memorizing every flicker of expression. I asked Dad if the partnership meant we'd all be working together again. He said yes in a way, that this was the start of something bigger than any of us. Vanessa laughed softly, saying some gifts take time to understand. The way she said gifts made my skin crawl. I tilted my head, pretending to be naive. I asked if the company really needed me that much. She said I was the bridge, that the deal would not exist without me. Dad nodded, eyes steady. He said I was the heart of the brand. At that moment, I saw it clearly. They didn't see a person sitting across from them. They saw an asset. And assets could be traded. I excused myself after the toast, saying I was tired. Upstairs, I shut the door, pressed my back against it, and listened to the faint sound of their voices fading below. The camera light blinked steady on the shelf. My phone was full of recordings and photos. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was focused. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier now, covering the driveway, softening everything it touched. Inside, I gathered every piece of evidence, organizing it into folders on my laptop. I named one of them Christmas dinner. Then I closed the screen and sat there in the dim light, letting the quiet settle. Tomorrow they will try again. But this time I will be ready. Morning came pale and brittle, the kind of winter light that made everything look fragile. I stood by the window, watching the driveway disappear under a new layer of snow. The house was still quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. My coffee sat untouched on the table beside me. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my dad's voice again saying, "If this was what it took, then so be it." The words had sunk into me like frost into soil. Now there was only clarity. They will try again tonight. I spent the early hours in quiet preparation. I charged the camera, checked the microphone, and transferred every file I'd recorded into 2 backups, one in the cloud, one on a hidden drive. Then I sent an email to myself with a short note that said, "If you're reading this, release everything." I set it to deliver automatically in 48 hours unless I stopped it. That gave me time, but not much. By 9, Vanessa was moving through the house in her holiday robe, directing the staff like a general before a parade. She was cheerful again, humming along to a song from the kitchen radio. When she saw me, she smiled as if nothing had ever gone wrong. She said Gordon would be arriving for dinner around 6, that we should make it special, intimate. She wanted me to wear the blue dress she'd sent up earlier. I told her I would. Dad came downstairs a little later, already in a suit. He looked tired but determined. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and said he appreciated my understanding that business sometimes required uncomfortable choices. I said I understood perfectly. He smiled, relieved, and said he knew he could count on me. After he left for the office, I went to the kitchen. Maria was kneading dough at the counter. Her hands moved with steady rhythm, but her eyes flicked toward the doorway before she spoke. She asked quietly if I had found what I needed. I told her yes. She told me to be careful, that they would be watching me closely tonight. Then she slipped a small key into my palm. It was old brass, smooth from years of use. She said it opened the side entrance to the wine cellar. She whispered that the security cameras there had been disconnected since last year. I thanked her, closing my fingers around the key. All day, the house felt like a set being dressed for a scene. The staff decorated, polished, and arranged until every surface gleamed. Vanessa floated through it all, directing with effortless authority. She stopped me once by the staircase, adjusted a strand of my hair, and said she wanted this night to remind me that we were family. I smiled and said it would. In my room, I laid out the blue dress across the bed. I pinned the brooch camera at the collar, adjusted it in the mirror until the angle looked natural. My hands were steady now. Fear had shifted into something colder, more focused. I had rehearsed what I would say if anyone questioned me. I would be calm, curious, never confrontational. Let them reveal themselves. At dusk, the guests began to arrive. Only a few this time close associates of my dad, men whose names I recognized from company newsletters. Gordon came last, carrying a gift bag wrapped in gold foil. He greeted me warmly, eyes scanning me in a way that made my skin crawl. He told my dad the future looked bright. My dad agreed. Dinner began in the smaller dining room, more intimate, just the six of us. Candles flickered on the table, reflecting off crystal and silver. I sat between Vanessa and Gordon, my dad across from me. The conversation started light, talking of markets and charity work. But underneath it, there was an electric tension. Vanessa poured wine for everyone, her movements graceful, controlled. When she reached my glass, she hesitated a fraction of a second before filling it. I smiled at her, pretending not to notice. Halfway through the meal, Dad raised his glass and thanked everyone for their partnership. He said tonight marked a turning point, not just for the company, but for the family. He looked at me when he said family. I lifted my glass, meeting his eyes, and said I was proud of what we built together. My voice didn't shake. After the toast, Vanessa turned to me. She said Gordon had been hoping for a chance to talk privately, that he admired my insight and thought I could offer valuable perspective on the brand's image. Gordon nodded, smiling, his hand resting lightly on my chair. I said I would be happy to talk after dinner. The meal ended. Vanessa suggested coffee in the study. Dad agreed. I excused myself, saying I would bring my bag upstairs. In the hallway, I slipped into the shadows near the staircase and waited until they had moved. Ahead, then I turned toward the wine cellar door at the far end of the hall. The key Maria had given me slid in smoothly. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside, the air was cool and dry, smelling of oak and dust. I closed the door behind me and set the camera phone on a shelf facing upward. I pressed the record. The cellar was directly beneath the study. Sound carried easily through the vent near the ceiling. Minutes later, footsteps echoed above. The voices began faintly, then clearer. Gordon's voice, first confident, relaxed. He said she trusts you completely, meaning Vanessa. She laughed, saying I always have. Then Dad spoke, saying once she signs the deal is sealed. I heard papers shuffle. Gordon said he wanted assurance. Vanessa promised I would agree. Then Gordon said something that made my stomach twist. He said if persuasion failed, they had other methods. My dad told him not to worry, that I was pragmatic, not emotional. They laughed softly, glasses clinking. I let the recording run until the conversation drifted to money and projections. Then I stopped it, tucked the phone into my pocket, and slipped back out through the door. The air upstairs felt different, heavier. When I returned to the study, they were still standing by the fire. Vanessa smiled when she saw me, her expression flawless. She asked if I was ready to talk business. I said I was. Gordon gestured toward the sofa. We sat. He explained the proposal as if it were an opportunity tailored just for me. He spoke about image rights, publicity, and partnership events. The contract lay on the table between us, my name typed neatly at the top. I asked questions, calm and steady. I asked if I would have creative control, if there would be limitations. They assured me everything was flexible. I asked what would happen if I said no. There was a pause. My dad's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. He said he hoped it wouldn't come to that. I took the pen in my hand and twirled it slowly. I could feel their anticipation tightening the air. Then I set it down. I told them I appreciated the offer, but that I needed time. Vanessa's voice softened, almost pleading. She said I shouldn't overthink it, that this was my chance to secure my future. Gordon nodded, saying hesitation kills momentum. I stood smoothing my dress. I told them I wanted to sleep on it. My dad's jaw tightened. Vanessa started to protest, but Gordon stopped her with a glance. He said patience is a virtue. Then smiled at me, his teeth catching the firelight. I thanked them for dinner and turned toward the door. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, the weight of their silent calculation. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against it. The camera in my brooch had caught every word, every gesture, every lie. I connected it to my laptop, transferred the files, and watched the footage play on the screen. The clarity was perfect. Their faces were calm, polished, confident. The sound of their voices filled the room, each syllable sealing their own fate. Outside, the snow had stopped. The moonlight spilled across the lawn, silver and quiet. Somewhere below, the house slept in its own deceit. I sat by the window listening to the faint hum of the night and felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. I closed the laptop, slid it under the bed, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring its own storm, and I intended to be ready when it came. The night of the deal began like every other holiday evening in that house. Bright orchestrated false. Candles flickered along the dining table, throwing soft shadows on the polished silver. Vanessa moved through the room in a red silk dress, her every gesture practiced and slow. My dad poured wine with a smile too wide to be genuine. Gordon Hale arrived exactly on time, shaking off the snow, his laughter booming through the foyer like a performance. I sat perfectly still at my seat, my camera already recording my pulse steady. Everything was in motion now, and they didn't know the stage no longer belonged to them. The first course was served a creamy soup that smelled of truffle and butter. I could barely taste it. I studied the details instead, every sound and flicker of light. The clink of Dad's cufflink against his glass, the way Vanessa's hand lingered on Gordon's shoulder when she poured his wine, the faint tremor in her fingers when she refilled mine. I watched all of it through calm eyes, memorizing the choreography. Gordon lifted his glass and toasted to success. I raised mine with the others, the rim of crystal catching the candlelight. I pretended to sip, feeling the liquid touch my lips, but not my tongue. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me, searching. She smiled when I set the glass down. She thought she had me. Dad leaned back, voice warm and rehearsed. He said how proud he was to have us all together, how this partnership represented the future of the company. Gordon nodded, praising the Hart family's vision. I smiled politely, my hand resting lightly on the table. Inside, my mind was counting seconds, each moment closer to what I'd prepared. When the main course arrived, the room shifted. The conversation grew quieter, more deliberate. Vanessa leaned toward me, telling me to relax, to enjoy the evening, that everything I'd worked for was finally within reach. Her words tasted like the wine I refused to drink. I thanked her, saying I trusted her judgment. She smiled with satisfaction, not realizing that was exactly what I wanted her to believe. Dad asked Gordon to sign a few preliminary documents after dinner. Simple formalities, he said. I kept my expression neutral, pretending not to know what they really were. My camera caught every word, every exchange of papers, every glance. Halfway through the meal, Gordon excused himself to take a call. When he left the room, Vanessa turned to Dad. She whispered something I couldn't catch, then glanced at my untouched glass. Dad nodded slightly. I waited until she looked away and switched the glasses, sliding mine toward his side of the table, as if adjusting space for the plates. When Gordon returned, Vanessa clapped her hands lightly, signaling dessert. Maria appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of brandy glasses and chocolate mousse. She met my eyes for just a heartbeat. I gave her the smallest nod. She placed the glasses carefully, pouring one extra at the end for Gordon. Vanessa offered a toast, her voice bright. To loyalty, she said, to family and future. I touched my glass to hers again, the sound sharp and clear in the heavy air. Dad lifted the glass I had moved and took a sip, distracted by conversation. Vanessa followed, laughing, drinking deep. Gordon joined them, the three of them framed by firelight and greed. I only watched. At first, nothing changed. Then Dad's words began to slur slightly. Vanessa's laughter faltered. Gordon frowned, blinking as if the room had grown brighter. I sat very still. Maria reappeared quietly, gathering plates, her eyes down. Dad stood, tried to pour another glass, and the bottle slipped from his hand, rolling across the table. Vanessa reached to steady him, but she swayed too. Gordon cursed softly, gripping the edge of the chair. I rose, feigning alarm, my voice calm. I asked if they were all right, if they needed water. No one answered. Vanessa's hand found my wrist. Her eyes were wide, confused. She whispered my name, the syllables slow and heavy. I leaned close enough for the camera to catch her face. She asked what was happening. I told her quietly that maybe they should have checked under their plates first. Dad tried to stand again but failed. The room tilted in his vision. I stepped back, watching him collapse into the chair. Gordon muttered something about bad liquor, his voice fading. The only sound left was the slow crackle of the fire. Maria entered once more, her expression unreadable. She asked softly if I needed help. I told her to open the windows. The cold night air swept in, carrying the scent of snow and pine. I took my phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. By the time the ambulance lights painted the driveway red, I was sitting on the staircase wrapped in a blanket, answering questions from the paramedics. I said they must have eaten something spoiled, maybe the dessert. I played the part, perfectly calm, shaken but composed. The officers took notes, the paramedics worked, the chaos grew. Through it all, I kept my voice level, my eyes wet but dry of tears. They took Dad and Vanessa to the hospital for observation. Gordon refused treatment, insisting he was fine, though his face was gray. When the last vehicle left the driveway, silence returned. Maria stood in the doorway with her coat draped over her shoulders. She asked quietly what I had done. I said I hadn't done anything they hadn't already planned for me. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. She said she would come back in the morning. Before leaving, she looked around the room, the half-empty glasses, the broken bottle, the candles burning low. She said sometimes the truth doesn't need fire to destroy it, only needs light. I locked the door behind her. The house was still there again. I gathered the glasses from the table and rinsed them one by one. The smell of brandy filled the air, sweet and heavy. I placed them upside down on the rack, then wiped the table clean. I moved through the house methodically, collecting every trace of the evening until the only thing left was the echo of what had been said. In the quiet, I opened my laptop and reviewed the footage. The video showed the dinner from start to finish, every conversation, every exchange, the final collapse. I watched it twice, then saved it to 3 separate drives. One I hid in my suitcase, another I sent to a private server, the third I placed in a sealed envelope addressed to myself. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and silent. I stood by the window and watched the flakes drift through the porch light. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of sirens fading into the night. I felt no joy, no triumph, only the deep, still calm that comes when you stop being afraid. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the fireplace. The house looked almost peaceful now, stripped of performance. I sat in my dad's chair and stared into the flames. The firelight flickered across the walls, catching the edge of the silver frame that held a photo of me at 17, smiling beside him at the company gala. I took the photo down and turned it face down on the table. Then I leaned back and closed my eyes, listening to the slow hiss of the dying fire. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own story. The night stretched quiet and long, the kind of silence that comes only after truth has been spoken, even if no one heard it yet. Somewhere outside, a wind rose, rattling the windows, whispering against the glass like a voice reminding me that morning was coming, and with it, the rest of the reckoning. I woke before dawn to the sound of silence, the kind that hums through empty rooms after something irreversible has happened. The fire had burned out hours ago, leaving only cold ash and the faint smell of smoke. The house was still. No footsteps, no voices, no music. I sat up on the couch, every muscle aching from the night before, and watched the gray light creep across the floor. Outside, the snow was piled high against the windows, muting the world into a hush that felt almost holy. For a moment, I let myself imagine it was peace, but peace was never free. Not here. By mid-morning, my phone began to buzz. Messages from colleagues, distant relatives, a few reporters who somehow already knew something had happened at the Hart estate. Words like emergency incident investigation appeared in every notification. I didn't answer any of them. I walked to the kitchen instead, poured black coffee into a chipped mug, and stared at the swirling steam until it blurred my reflection in the window. Maria arrived a little after 10. She looked tired but composed, her eyes sharp despite the soft lines of her face. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. She said the hospital had called, that my dad and Vanessa were being kept overnight for observation. I asked if they were conscious. She nodded slowly, saying they would recover, though neither had given a statement yet. Relief should have come with that news, but it didn't. What I felt was emptiness, the echo of everything that had finally collapsed. I asked if anyone else knew what had happened. She said the police believed it was food poisoning, nothing more. I thanked her for keeping quiet. She poured herself coffee. The two of us standing in silence like survivors who didn't know if the storm was truly over. Around noon, my dad's lawyer, Diane Whitaker, called. Her voice was smooth, professional, but I heard the edge beneath it. She said there were questions about the evening, that I might be asked to give a brief statement later in the day. I said I would cooperate. She reminded me to be careful with my wording, to avoid implying blame. I told her I understood. What I didn't tell her was that every word they had said was already saved in perfect clarity on my laptop. I spent the afternoon replaying the recordings. I listened to their voices again and again, pausing, rewinding, catching the moments when their control slipped. The sound of Vanessa's laughter just before she spoke about making sure I didn't have the chance to refuse. My dad's weary agreement. The tone of a man convincing himself betrayal was duty. I let those words wash over me until they lost their sting. By evening, the first email from the press hit my inbox. A journalist from a financial network wanted to confirm rumors of a scandal involving the company's leadership. I didn't reply. I opened Reddit instead. The front page of our corporate drama had a thread titled "Christmas Chaos at Hart, Sterling Partners." Someone had posted photos of the ambulance outside our house, taken by a neighbor. The comments were already flooding in speculation mixing with gossip. I scrolled through them slowly, my pulse steady. I logged into an anonymous account I had created months earlier for work. Research. I hesitated for a long time before dragging one of the smaller video files into the upload box. It was only 30 seconds long, a snippet of the dinner conversation. Nothing incriminating, yet just enough to spark curiosity. I clicked the post and set the title as Family Loyalty Gone Wrong. Then I closed the laptop and walked away. When I came back an hour later, the post had already exploded. Hundreds of comments, thousands of upvotes. People analyzing every frame, speculating about who was speaking, what deal was being discussed, who the woman in red might be. I read the comments in silence, feeling something shift inside me. Not exactly, more like inevitability. The phone rang again. This time it was my dad. His voice sounded weak but deliberate. He said he had heard I was still at the house, that he wanted to talk privately. I told him I was listening. He said mistakes had been made, that stress made people do foolish things. He said what mattered now was protecting the family name. I asked him if protecting the name was worth destroying his daughter. There was a pause so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said he did what he had to do. I told him so did I. Then I ended the call. The next morning, the story hit national news. A leaked recording of a corporate dinner at Hart Sterling Partners showing internal misconduct and personal exploitation. The audio was crisp, damning, and untraceable. It has been reposted across Reddit, TikTok, and YouTube under the title The Christmas Betrayal. My dad's voice was unmistakable. Vanessa's laughter was there, too brittle and rehearsed. The company issued a statement denying the authenticity of the recording. But by then, the damage had already been done. Investors began to pull out clients, froze contracts, and hashtags filled social media feeds calling for accountability. I sat in the same kitchen, coffee gone cold, watching the headlines unfold like someone reading a story she had already finished writing. Maria walked in quietly, holding her phone. She said the board had suspended my dad pending investigation. Vanessa had been asked to step down from her public relations role. The house phone rang again and again, reporters, lawyers, desperate voices clawing for explanation. I didn't pick up. By evening, a different kind of silence settled over the house. Not the tense quiet of secrets, but the hollow calm that follows exposure. I walked upstairs to my dad's study. The desk was still scattered with papers from the night before. The contract with Hale Dynamics lay open, unsigned. I picked it up, folded it once, and dropped it into the fireplace. The paper curled black at the edges, flames eating the ink until there was nothing left but ash. Behind the desk, the shelves were lined with awards-framed photos, artifacts of a life built on image. I touched the glass covering one of the family portraits. The girl in the photo looked younger, eager, and unaware. I left it where it was. Later that night, Maria returned with dinner, simple soup and bread. We ate together quietly. She said she didn't regret helping me. She said some truths need witnesses, and that she had seen enough of what people like them could do. I asked her if she thought justice ever balanced things out. She said maybe not in the way we hope, but enough to remind the world that no one is untouchable. When she left, I sat by the window again, laptop open. The Reddit post had become a top story, spreading faster than I could follow. People debated ethics, betrayal, and the power of exposure. A few defended my parents, most did not. Somewhere in the middle of the noise, someone had called me a silent revenger. I read the phrase twice. It fit in a way that surprised me. The snow outside had turned to rain, melting the drifts into dark rivers along the driveway. I could hear it tapping against the glass, steady and soft. I saved the last of my recordings to a hidden drive and locked it in a drawer. Not for release, not yet, just insurance. The next day, my dad's lawyer called again, her tone clipped and careful. She said my dad was considering a public apology, that the family needed to appear united. I told her unity was a word that had lost its meaning. She sighed, said she understood, then hung up. That night, I turned off the lights and let the darkness settle. The house no longer felt like theirs. It was hollow, stripped of its charm, but it was quiet. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain fading into sleet, the last of winter's voice soft against the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the girl trapped in someone else's story. I was writing my own, now word by word, in the silence they had taught me to fear. The morning the world found out was colder than any I could remember. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of winter light that makes time feel suspended. I sat on the edge of my bed, laptop open, watching headlines bloom like frost across every news feed. Hart Sterling Partners scandal deepens. Leaked audio suggests corporate corruption. Christmas dinner betrayal goes viral. Each title hit with a slow, measured weight, but I felt detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. The steam from the cup had long since vanished, leaving only a bitter ring on the nightstand. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant sound of car tires crunching over the frozen driveway. The story was everywhere now, and there was no stopping it. By mid-morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Unknown numbers, news producers, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted a comment. I didn't answer. Instead, I wrapped myself in my coat and went downstairs. The air in the house felt hollow, stripped of warmth. The fire was out. The decorations on the mantel looked artificial in the daylight. For the first time, the house felt honest. Maria was already there, standing at the kitchen counter with the morning paper folded neatly beside her. She said nothing when I entered, only handed me the paper. The headline stretched across the front page, "Betrayal at Christmas." My dad's face was printed in color, frozen mid-sentence, the image taken from the video I had uploaded days earlier. Vanessa's smile, perfectly staged, hovered just behind him. Beneath the photo was a single line. "Family company faces collapse after leaked footage exposes deception." I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. Maria asked softly if I was all right. I said yes, though my voice didn't sound like mine. She told me the board had called an emergency meeting. Investors were pulling out, clients were cutting ties. The company's stock had dropped 40% overnight. My dad had refused to give a statement. Vanessa had left the hospital early that morning, escorted by a private driver. I asked where she went. Maria shook her head. No one knew. The television in the living room played a news broadcast. A reporter stood outside the company's headquarters, microphone trembling in the wind. Behind her, protesters held signs with words like justice and accountability. The camera zoomed in on the entrance where a man was shouting about greed and betrayal. The image flickered, then cut to footage of the viral video. My dad's voice filled the room again, clear and calm, discussing me as if I were an asset. I turned away, my chest tightening. Maria turned off the television. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. She asked what I would do now. I said I didn't know yet, but deep down I did. I would not hide. At noon, the company released an official statement on social media. The words were polished, predictable, and hollow. They expressed regret for the misunderstanding, promised transparency, and blamed the recording on manipulation. I read it twice and felt a strange kind of pity. The truth had already escaped them. Within an hour, the comments section filled with disbelief. People were posting transcripts, analyzing audio, comparing voice patterns, and identifying background noises from the house. Reddit threads multiplied by the minute. One post titled "The Silent Revenger of Greenwich" reached the front page, filled with speculation about who leaked the footage. Some thought it was a disgruntled employee, others a whistleblower. A few guessed it was me. I logged out before I could read more. Outside, the snow was melting into slush, the once perfect driveway now streaked with mud. A black SUV pulled up near the gate. A woman stepped out, tall, composed, her coat fluttering around her like a shadow. It was Diane, my dad's lawyer. I met her at the door before she could knock. She didn't waste time. She said there were questions about the recordings, that I should prepare for inquiries. She asked if I had spoken to the press. I said no. She nodded, her mouth tight. She said the board believed I might be the source. I told her my belief was not proof. Her eyes flickered, measuring me. She said the family's best option was unity. I almost laughed. Unity was the one thing this family had never known. I told her I had nothing to hide. She warned me that the company's reputation was disintegrating, that my dad's career might not survive. I said maybe it shouldn't. For the first time, she had no reply. After she left, I went back upstairs. The house felt colder now. The heater hummed, but it couldn't chase away the chill. I opened my laptop again. Dozens of new emails had arrived, some angry, some grateful. Strangers shared their own stories of betrayal and survival. Women wrote about dads, husbands, bosses who had treated them like property. They thanked me for having the courage to expose mine. Their words made my throat ache. That night, news channels played the video again, this time with commentary. Experts discussed corporate ethics, family power dynamics, and exploitation. Every sentence dissected the dinner like it was a crime scene. They paused on my dad's expression, on Vanessa's smile. On the moment, the laughter stopped. I sat in the dark, letting it play, watching their faces without feeling anything. The anger had burned itself out. What remained was something quieter, heavier, closer to sorrow. Not for them, but for the version of me that had once believed love could fix everything. Maria came in with a cup of tea. She said the world was finally seeing them for what they were. I asked if that made it right. She said maybe not, but it made it real. That mattered. The next morning brought a storm. Reporters gathered outside the gates, cameras flashing through the snow. They shouted questions as I stepped outside. I kept walking, my boots crunching on the ice. Their voices blurred into a hum. I reached the mailbox, opened it, and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single folded note. It was my dad's handwriting. It said only 3 words: "You destroyed us." I stared at the words until the ink blurred in the cold. Then I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. The wind whipped through the trees, scattering flakes of snow across the lawn. That evening, the board released a public statement confirming my dad's suspension. Vanessa was listed as under investigation for financial misconduct. Gordon Hale had withdrawn his offer entirely, citing personal reasons. Within 24 hours, the company's website went offline. The empire they had built on image had collapsed under its own weight. I spent that night in the living room, watching the flames in the fireplace rise and fall. Maria had gone home. The house was mine again, but it felt empty, echoing with ghosts of conversations and laughter that had never been real. I thought about the first time I had been told to smile for a camera, how unnatural it had felt to pretend happiness for an audience. Now the entire world was watching, and for once I didn't have to pretend. As midnight neared, my phone buzzed. A private message from an unknown account. It simply said, "Thank you for speaking the truth." No name, no signature. I stared at the screen, then smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, someone understood. I set the phone aside, leaned back in the chair, and listened to the wind outside. The scandal had stripped everything away: money illusion, pretense, and left me with something I hadn't expected. Silence. But it wasn't empty anymore, it was clean. Tomorrow would bring lawyers' headlines, maybe more judgment. But tonight, there was only the sound of snow melting on the windows and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped inside their story. I was free to write my own. By the end of that week, the world had already moved on to another scandal, another name, another headline. But for me, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that came before it. The reporters were gone, the gates locked, the lights dimmed. Snow had melted into gray puddles along the driveway, and the air smelled of wet pine and smoke. I stood by the window of my dad's empty house and watched the last car from the legal team drive away. The company was frozen, the accounts under investigation, the house listed for sale. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like an ending too quiet to celebrate. Maria arrived that afternoon with groceries. She had been coming by every few days since everything fell apart, saying she didn't trust me to eat properly. She moved through this kitchen with calm efficiency, setting a pot of soup on the stove, humming softly under her breath. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked at me and said it was time to let the house go. I told her I already had. She asked what I would do next. I said I hadn't decided. The truth was, I had been thinking about leaving Greenwich altogether. The city had always been too polished, too full of people who smiled through their teeth. I wanted someplace quiet where no one knew my name. Maria nodded like she already knew that was coming. She told me she still had an old cottage near New Haven that her sister had left behind. She said I could stay there for a while. That night, I packed a single suitcase. The house was mostly empty now, the echoes louder than my footsteps. I left the paintings, the furniture, the things that had never really been mine. Before I locked the door, I looked around one last time. The garland on the staircase was still there, brittle and dry. The faint scent of Vanessa's perfume lingered in the hall. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The drive south was long and quiet. The snow thinned into rain as I left the town behind. I drove with the windows cracked just enough to feel the cold air on my face. The sky was pale, streaked with light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. When I reached New Haven, the streets were wet and shining. The cottage sat at the end of a narrow road surrounded by birch trees, its windows glowing faintly from a small porch light Maria had left on. Inside it was simple. Wooden floors, an old fireplace, the faint scent of lavender from the sheets. I dropped my bag and exhaled. The silence here felt different. It wasn't empty. It was clean, honest. I made a fire, opened the windows just enough to hear the wind, and let the warmth fill the small room. For days I lived like that. I woke early, made coffee, and walked along the frozen path behind the cottage. I didn't check the news. I didn't open my phone except to answer Maria's occasional messages. I cooked, I read, I let the quiet rebuild me. But peace never stays unbroken for long. One morning a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, the handwriting careful. It was from the board of Hart Sterling Partners. They were finalizing the dissolution of the company. My dad's assets were being divided, his position permanently terminated. There was a note in the bottom saying a portion of the remaining shares would be transferred to me per his final instruction before stepping down. My stomach tightened as I read it. Even in his downfall, he wanted control. That evening, I sat by the fire with the letter in my lap. I thought about the girl who used to beg for his approval, who spent years twisting herself into shapes he could love. I thought about the woman I had become, who no longer needed that approval to exist. Then I tore the letter into small pieces and fed it to the fire. The paper caught quickly, curling into orange light, then ash. Days turned into weeks. The headlines faded. The company's name disappeared from the news cycle. Vanessa was spotted once in New York, wearing sunglasses and walking with a publicist. My dad stayed silent. Some said he left the country. Others said he was living quietly with an old friend in Maine. I didn't care enough to find out. Spring came slowly that year. The snow receded and the world softened. The birch trees outside the cottage began to bloom again. I started writing not for anyone but myself. Fragments of memory, pieces of truth that didn't belong to the world outside. It was the only way I knew how to make sense of what had happened. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, Maria arrived with a basket of vegetables and that same gentle smile she always carried. She said I looked better. I told her I was learning to breathe again. She laughed and said breathing was the beginning of everything. Then she sat beside me and poured us both tea. As the sun dipped below the trees, she told me something I hadn't expected. She said it was her who sent the first message that night at the dinner table. She had borrowed one of the house staff's phones, knowing they wouldn't trace it back to her. She said she had seen Vanessa slip the vial under my plate, and she couldn't let it happen. For a long time I didn't speak. The fireflies flickered in the grass, tiny sparks in the fading light. I asked her why she risked it. She said she had seen too much cruelty in that house, and that saving me felt like saving something in herself. I took her hand and held it. There were no words that could carry the weight of what she had done for me. That night after she left, I sat by the window and thought about all the years I had spent being silent, how silence had been both my cage and my weapon. I thought about the people who had written to me after the story broke, women who had seen themselves in my pain. Their words came back to me like a chorus. Thank you for showing us it's possible. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't even feel brave. What I felt was free. Free from the version of myself that had been defined by someone else's ambition. Free from the hunger for approval. Free from the performance of perfection that had once suffocated me. When morning came, I walked outside barefoot into the dew. The grass was cold against my skin. The sun was rising over the trees, pale and patient. I looked up at it and felt something inside me settle. Not peace, exactly, but something close. Later, I made coffee and opened my laptop for the first time in weeks. My inbox was full again. Messages from strangers, journalists, documentary producers. I scrolled through them all and stopped at one that made me pause. It was a short email from a young woman who said she had been forced to leave her own family after speaking out. She ended her note with a single line. Your silence gave me courage. I sat there for a long time, the morning light spilling across the table. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and opened the door. The air outside smelled of rain and renewal. I took a deep breath and stepped out into it, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little. The world was still flawed, still cruel in its quiet ways, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had learned that sometimes the loudest act of revenge isn't destruction, it's survival. The first Christmas after everything ended came quietly. No headlines, no cameras, no chaos. Just the sound of snow settling outside my small apartment in Boston and the hum of the heater that never quite caught up with the cold. I had moved there in late autumn, leaving behind the cottage near New Haven when the trees turned bare. The city was loud and alive, but my street stayed calm, tucked between old brick buildings and coffee shops that smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar. On Christmas morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window watching the light spill over the frozen roofs. For the first time in years, I felt no expectation pressing on my shoulders. No family waiting, no roles to play, just the quiet miracle of being exactly where I chose to be. I had spent most of that year rebuilding in small ways. Freelance styling jobs, consulting for small brands that didn't know my last name. I worked quietly, kept my circle small, and learned how to live without explaining myself. Sometimes the past still reaches me. A news article would surface about corporate reform, or a documentary producer would send another email asking for my story. I never answered. My silence wasn't secrecy anymore. It was peaceful. Maria called once a week. She still worked part-time at a bakery near New Haven, but said it kept her busy. We talked about ordinary things, the weather, her neighbors' recipes. She never asked about my dad or Vanessa. I never offered. We had both made peace in our own ways. I sent her a Christmas card that week, with a note inside that simply said thank you for saving my life. That afternoon, I took a walk through the park near the river. The ground was frozen and the trees glittered with frost. Families passed me carrying gifts, children dragging sleds through the snow. Their laughter echoed through the air, warm and real. I thought of my childhood, of Christmas mornings that looked perfect from the outside but always felt hollow underneath. The performance, the camera flashes, the way Vanessa would stage every smile. I had once believed that beauty required sacrifice. Now I knew beauty could be as simple as quiet as survival, as a single breath taken freely. When I returned home, there was an envelope waiting in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, it was my dad's. I stood in the doorway for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page, his writing, careful, uneven. He said he was living in Maine, that he had been trying to find the right words for months. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't defend himself. He wrote only that he hoped I had found peace, that he had finally learned what losing control of your own story truly costs. He ended with a sentence that stopped me. I understand now what you were trying to teach me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. Just a strange, steady sadness that belonged to the part of me that still wanted a dad worth forgiving. Later that evening, I met a friend for dinner, someone I had met through work. Her name was Claire, a photographer in her 60s with silver hair and a laugh that filled any room. She had once told me that survival changes the way you see light. I think she was right. Over pasta and wine, we talked about everything but the past. She told me about her daughter's engagement. I told her about a client who wanted to shoot a campaign in Vermont. It was simple, easy, the kind of conversation that lives in the present. When we left the restaurant, snow was falling again, soft and slow. She hugged me and said, "Merry Christmas, kid." I smiled and meant it. That night I came home and lit a single candle. The flame flickered against the glass, casting small shadows across the room. I opened my laptop and watched the video one last time. The Christmas dinner. The conversation, the moment everything changed. I hadn't looked at it in months. Watching it now, I didn't feel anger or fear, only clarity. It was like watching a ghost fade. I deleted the file, then emptied the trash. The screen went black, reflecting only my own face. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the snow kept falling thick and gentle. The city lights glowed beneath it like tiny stars caught in motion. I thought about the word revenge, how heavy it used to feel, how people mistook it for destruction. For me, revenge had never been about tearing anyone down. It was about standing up, about telling the truth without screaming, about reclaiming the voice they had stolen and using it to choose silence on my own terms. Around midnight, I took out the bracelet my dad had given me that last Christmas, the one that once belonged to my mother. I had kept it in a small box untouched. I fastened it around my wrist and held it up to the light. The gold caught the flame, shimmering softly. It didn't feel like a relic anymore. It felt like a reminder that everything can be repurposed, even pain. The clock ticked past midnight. The world outside was still. I thought of Maria closing her bakery for the night, of Claire laughing somewhere across town, of strangers who had written to me after the scandal, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. For the first time, I wanted to reach back. I opened my laptop again, not to delete this time, but to write. The words came slowly at first, then with rhythm. I wrote about boundaries, about choosing dignity over belonging, about how silence can be both wound and weapon. I didn't name anyone. I didn't tell the story the world already thought it knew. I told mine instead. When I finished, I uploaded it anonymously to the same subreddit where the first recording had appeared. The title was simple: What Happens After Revenge? Within an hour, comments began to appear. People wrote about their own endings, their own lessons. Some were angry, some hopeful, some lost. I read each one, my chest tightening with something that felt like a connection. It wasn't fame or validation, it was recognition. A reminder that healing, like revenge, is never really solitary. When the candle burned low, I closed the laptop and looked out the window one last time. Snow still fell endless and quiet. The world was clean again, at least for the night. I thought about everything that had brought me here, every lie, every wound, every choice. All of it had led me back to myself. I whispered a quiet thank you to the woman I used to be, the one who stayed silent when it was dangerous, who survived long enough to speak when it mattered. If you are listening now somewhere in your own silence, wondering if it ever ends, I want you to know it does. Maybe not cleanly, maybe not quickly, but it ends. And when it does, you get to choose who you become next. So if you have ever walked away from the people who should have loved you, most tell me your story. I know how that feels.